Where are you from?
I'm New York, but I've been
Staycationing.
I've been summering in Queens, which is not fun. Not fun. You know, Kathleen Hanna.
Yes.
Thank you for coming on
You're
my
welcome.
podcast, Film Wax Radio. Have you done many podcasts? Have you?
No, I don't even think I've done
What?
one podcast.
Fantastic.
This
So,
is my first podcast, I believe.
congratulations, I think.
May have done one over the phone that I didn't know I was being podcasted, so it was like a secret podcast, and then they did
Well,
it.
Oh, really?
And they didn't tell me. I don't know.
That's some conniving. But you know what they do? What sometimes happens, you'll do like an NPR or a public radio or a whatever radio show, and then they repurpose it as a podcast.
That's what's happened to me. NPR.
Yeah, and then
podcasting.
it's out on the internet. But it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks for having me on your podcast. What's your podcast called?
It's called Film Wax Radio.
Awesome.
Punk Prayer. No, what is
Punk
it?
Singer.
Punk Singer. There's another. I'm sorry. Pussy
Punk
Riot.
Prayer is the Pussy Riot.
The Pussy Riot film.
Yeah.
And it's been on I just had on Maxim, who's one of the two filmmakers again because of missing Nadia
Yes.
Tolokonnikova.
Nice
That's
job
the
on
actual.
that name, yeah.
I can't pronounce it. Anyway, so I called. We did a little interview, just like getting his reaction to that. But she's a feminist. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yeah, absolutely.
I figured.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any level of self-consciousness when you to call yourself that? Because the phrase has been co-opted. You know, there's always a sort of a response to the term feminist. It goes in and out of fashion. You know?
I don't know when it's ever really been in fashion. I feel like there's always this
right.
thing where it's like, oh, it's about, women who hate men or they've been sexually abused and so they don't like men and they have hairy legs and blah, 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 and like, I'm not a feminist because I love men. And I don't know. I think that it's just there's a lot of stereotypes about feminism that aren't true. Like for me, feminism is about ending the oppression of all people. It's not just about like white women climbing the corporate ladder, which I think is another version of feminism that I'm not interested in. But I also think that there's as many different kinds of feminism as there are women. And the more we argue, the better. It makes feminism
Discourse.
Stronger when we argue.
Yeah.
Than when we, just like act like there's some, unity that isn't really there.
Right. So did you initially, for those who haven't seen the documentary by Cindy Anderson, did you go into music as a means of expressing your feelings about what it was like to be a young woman and at the time? You were at college, right? You were in college when you started
Yeah.
as a songwriter and as a performer.
Yeah.
And as a designer, fashion designer, correct? Or is
yeah,
that just sort of
fashion. I did do fashion.
It was
I
part
did
of the original
photography.
show, right?
Yeah.
Like that you were, yeah.
I really came at it from the perspective that I worked at a domestic violence shelter. And
When was this, by the way?
this was in like 89, 90. I guess it was in 89. And I was in a band called Viva Knievel before I was in Bikini Kill.
Uh-huh.
And I specifically wrote about domestic violence and rape because I was working at a shelter and, it was a lot for a 19-year-old to handle.
It's intense.
Yeah, it was very intense, and I needed sort of an outlet for it. And I remember doing it, and people saying like, "Oh, that's just therapy," and I was like, "Yeah, so what? Like, how is music made by men not therapy? How is it not them, singing about the things that are important to them or that frustrate them, or like getting out their anger or getting out their sadness? Like, why am I any different?" And I remember, I went on my first tour, and really, there'd be like 3 women in the audience, and all 3 of them would come up to me afterwards and tell me horrific stories about how they've been raped or experienced incest or anything like that, because I actually said on stage, this song's about rape or this song's about domestic violence. And I realized I was lucky because I had training as a counselor, so I was doing like counseling in alleyways. And I realized,
it was like triage on some level.
It totally was. And it was like, oh, I'm taking what I've learned at the shelter on the road. And part of what my art became was not just making the music, but doing counseling after shows in back alleyways where with women who didn't want to call a rape crisis line or were afraid to go to a domestic violence shelter. And a lot of times trying to point them in the direction of like, well, here's here's how you can do that, because I can't give you everything in the next half an hour, you know?
Yeah. So you mentioned, though, a lot of the audience were guys. Maybe it was because it was such an aggressive form of music, which would be interpreted before you guys anyway as being very male energy. I think the reason why you are where you are and what you've accomplished is because you changed that perspective, that assumption about the music. It is now can be easily also a woman's music. And so I'm wondering, though, early on when you were kind of growing and emerging, and you had so many guys, how they would respond to those very same songs and lyrics, and especially initially, I think.
You know, there was a lot of show us your. Am I allowed to curse?
Yeah. Totally.
Show us your tits. There's a lot of that. The most common one was when I would introduce a song, and it was really important to me because we were playing at crappy punk clubs that had crappy PAs, and you couldn't understand the lyrics. I would often hand out lyric sheets specifically to women so that they would understand what I was singing about, because I couldn't hear the lyrics because the PAs were so bad. But also I would talk between songs and say, this is what this is about. And I felt that was really important. And that was really the thing that got me the most shit. Men yelling, just shut up and play. Just shut up and play. Over and over and over.
And then finally you started tossing them out.
A couple times I did physically toss people out. You know, our shows didn't usually have security, so I was the security. At one show, actually, it was at a place where you had to do pat downs before you got in, and they didn't have a female security guard to do pat downs. And I was like, we're a feminist band, and all these women are coming to see us, and they're going to enter a Bikini Kill show by being pat down by a man? I don't think so. So I pat down every woman myself, and it was really funny because no one recognized me, because it was like pre-internet, and there wasn't a lot of pictures of me available in the universe. So it was really funny then that they all realized that they'd been patted down by the lead singer of the band.
Then the word got out, and then people would come to be pat down by Kathleen Hanna. Because I was wondering, I remember during Punk Singer, the documentary, there were scenes where, because moshing continued, for instance, which was very big, in the clubs at that point when Bikini Kill was hitting, their stride, but that guys would take advantage of that and grope and do all sorts of other acts of aggression against the women. And so I remember there was like a zero tolerance about that. I mean,
we did what we could. I mean, a lot of times we would ask women to stand in the front, mainly because of security, partially for us, because a lot of men would get violent towards us, would try to get on the stage, would try to grab me. One time our roadie got punched in the face when a guy was trying to punch me. So we had a lot of violence at our shows, and part of the reason we asked women to stand in the front was because
to avoid that,
it was like a protective barrier, but also, a big part of our mission was to encourage female participation in underground music. And if women couldn't see us play our instruments, how were they going to get inspired or see, like, wow, that's only 3 chords? Oh, the bass player's only, doing like dong, 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 dong. I could do that. So that was another big reason why we invited the women to front. We were like, if you want to mosh, go ahead. I mean, there were women who wanted to mosh. We were just like, why don't you do it in the back so that we can have women who want to actually see our band.
And that worked out, by and large, a lot better anyway.
What's funny is, like, after we did a lot of outreach trying to get women to come to our shows, because, like I mentioned before, like, there weren't a lot of women at our shows in the beginning, and so we had postcards that we would send. We would get women's addresses at our, if there's 3 women there, I had their addresses on a clipboard, and when I went home, I invited them to the next show in the town and said, please bring your female friends. So we did that over and over and over again, and we built a female audience that way, and they just started coming to the front because they already knew.
They figured it out,
Yeah, and what was weird was people, it became kind of the famous thing that we did, and there were a lot of times where there was no need to say it because the women had already occupied the front, and people would be like, wait, why didn't you say that thing you're supposed to say? And it'd be like, because I'm not a teacher or policeman, you know what I mean? It's like, we did it for a specific reason at a specific time, but there's no reason to keep
Right, you planted the seeds. Now the thing can grow naturally.
Exactly.
So I don't want to leave out the fact that this is a film, and that you were involved in the film, and part of that was contemporarily being interviewed by Cinean. I was wondering, a big part of that was opening up about your health issues, and were you at any point a little bit nervous about doing that? And what was that conversation like? In other words, when it was sort of taking a turn from that typical rock doc bio type of film into something far more personal. And, and just going in a very different direction too.
I mean, part of the thing is like with any documentary, you don't know what's going to happen during the filming, and what happened during the filming was I got a diagnosis of Lyme disease.
I
had it the whole time. I had it the whole
years,
time. For
right?
years and years and years.
Getting misdiagnosed.
Right. I mean, I was told I had Crohn's disease. I was told that it's probably lupus. It's probably MS. And I finally got the proper diagnosis during the film. And I just felt like I have to share this with other people who have similar symptoms because, I want to spread the word that the Lyme disease test that they give you at the doctor that costs $14 for the insurance company is not reliable, and you need to get a different test, and there's other tests that you can get, and I want people to know that because I was misdiagnosed for so long because I was given a crappy test twice. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to get the word out. It was important to me. It was really similar to singing about sexual abuse and domestic violence early on. These are things that women and men suffer in silence about. And Lyme disease is also an invisible illness. It's something that people suffer in silence. And so I really see a correlation between telling the truth about my illness and telling the truth about sexual abuse.
Is there some level, or are you suggesting there's a level of shame around Lyme disease? Or
yeah, I think there's definitely, because people don't understand it. I mean, with any invisible illness, like with MS and lupus also, a lot of times people can't see it.
Right.
So they don't believe.
There's no obvious manifestation that.
I'm lucky I had an obvious manifestation that was this thing called iritis in my eye, and it meant that I kept getting it, and it meant that I had an autoimmune illness, and there were 5 of them. And so I went through those 5 things trying to figure out what it was. And I crossed off Lyme disease off the list because I had the crappy test.
Okay.
So I actually did have a physical manifestation, but it's not like my friends saw it. These kind of illnesses, you're well for 2 weeks and then you're sick for 3 weeks, and you're well for 1 week and then you're sick for a month. And so, I feel like if you're somebody who has felt like you can do anything and then all of a sudden you can't do anything, I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed, and which is really similar to feelings around sexual abuse. And I know it might sound ridiculous, but you kind of start asking what did I do to deserve this? Because it's a really horrible disease. To be perfectly honest, it's really horrible.
And what's your current diagnosis? Status, yeah.
I am in remission. I've been in remission for 4 months, and I have 3 more kind of difficult treatments left to go, and then I'll be on a maintenance program, and hopefully it'll be smooth sailing. So
what is that? What is the program? If you can mention it, I don't want to pry too much about it. But no, I don't know what that would be like.
Well, I did 9 months of IV therapy with drugs like Cipro being pumped into my heart, and that was pretty difficult. And then now I'm doing oral antibiotics, and I pulse them off and on. So I have my last kind of 3 pulses that will be difficult, and then my body gets used to it, and then I stay on that same regimen for a year, and then they start weaning me off. I also take anti-seizure medications because I have neurological Lyme, and it causes me to have seizures.
Wow. Intense, Kathleen.
But I don't have them anymore.
But generally, do you perform much anymore? I mean,
I just got back from tour.
The newer band, the most recent. Julie Ruin.
We went on a 3-week tour, and it was fucking great. It was awesome. I was back on stage. I was happier than I've been in a really long time. Yeah. And I never ever thought I would be back on stage. And with the film, watching old footage of myself, it was really difficult, thinking that was it. That was the best time of my life, and from here on out, it's downwards,
Right.
spiral. And but I got a great doctor who gave me a second chance at life, and here I am, doing interviews, doing full press days.
Yeah.
I was on the radio yesterday. I did a TV show. I'm selling a comedy script to Comedy Central.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Unstoppable.
She's a machine now. So before we have to wind down, though, the Punk Singer is going to have its premiere, New York theatrical premiere, the 29th, is it?
Yeah, it's like
I got it
Thanksgiving
right?
weekend,
Oh,
at
very good.
IFC.
All right, so once you're coming off the tryptophan hangover, we highly urge you to go see The Punk Singer. It's a ton of fun, and you learn a lot about Kathleen Hanna, who's a delightful person and an amazing, an iconic performer, God forbid, iconic. And so it's going to be playing, you mentioned Nighthawk in Williamsburg.
Yeah, and I'm doing Q&As at all of them. So
At
if
all?
anybody-
Every single one?
Every single one of them.
Really?
I'm also, I'm doing one this Saturday.
At Doc NYC, which will have been, where is that going to be? At the IC Center, or is that at the?
The Doc NYC is at SVA.
Okay. Nice. I'm going to have to try to get over there.
I really had to burp this whole time.
Go for it. Right into the
Got
mic
it.
next time, please. What time is the screening on Saturday? I can at least mention
7:15.
Well, maybe I'll get over there. I might actually just get over there.
I don't interrupt, but would it be okay if you said Kathleen Hanna? I'm on Film Wax reading.
Oh,
Yeah, sure.
right. Yeah, we can do that after. We
Station
can do
ID?
that. That's great. We could do that after. I never remember. This is why it's great to have help, because I've sat with whenever I have somebody on, I realize I should be better about those promotional things.
It's like
getting somebody just to say, "This is Kathleen Hanna,
Hanna,
and you're
you're
listening
listening
to
to
Film
Film
Wax."
Wax Radio.
I never remember to do it. And
No,
I'd have on,
I do it on stage. It's like I'm supposed to say, hey, we have
Oh, right.
T-shirts and
Or thank.
CDs and LPs over at the merch table, and I never say it. And when you do say it, you sell twice as much.
Really?
Yes, I'm a total idiot. Thank God
Well,
for my keyboard player.
I'm going to come on the road with you then, just so I can make sure to remind you to do that. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the luck, and maybe I'll see you Saturday, but definitely enjoy being the subject of this great documentary. Don't do that. And remember to tell them to buy the merch in the lobby.
I know. I should actually bring merch to.
You should. Of course. There's people going to want to.